Hello and welcome back to The Editorial, the most popular podcast on the internet. I'm Jack Kelly and I'm joined by Zach Michaelis.
Was that just ad-libbed? That was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
The Editorial, if you don't know, is the show where every 2-ish weeks we respond to all of your criticisms and all of your feedback from our unpopular videos over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And we run through them one by one, we address the criticisms, and then we acknowledge. So, do you want to get started?
Yeah, let's just dive
What's the
straight in.
status of the last couple of weeks?
So we last
good
time
ones
did
or bad
this-
ones?
What was in it? Had been
Yeah, has
good
it
couple
been a
weeks.
good week for us or not?
Yeah, I think basically on most of the channels it's been a good week. I think we're going to end up covering quite a lot of stuff that die-hard editorial fans will be like familiar with. Like there's some classic things that bring down the like-dislike ratio. Like any video on Trump just is naturally lower. But in the aggregate, pretty good. As always, we've got UK, EU, global to talk about, and technically business. We can do away with UK and business very quickly.
Okay.
UK, there were no videos that fell below the threshold.
Huge.
There was a tiny error on the video that was about 3 unorthodox ways Labour could raise more tax, which was when this infographic was on screen trying to explain basically why the Treasury pays the Bank of England lots and lots of money every year, which is something I've been talking about for ages. And I just pity the animator who was given that script because it's just objectively really difficult to do. And there's one bit where the arrow goes to the banks, as it were, like HSBC, Lloyds, when it should be going to the Bank of England.
Okay.
There's a correction in the video, like I said, we did a little pin comment. That was a tiny little thing. And then in the Commonwealth video out today, I think there's a bit where like New Zealand isn't highlighted in at a certain point.
Okay.
But
New Zealanders hate that too.
I know, luckily there aren't too many of them.
Such a bugbear.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's that. But apart from that, I think it's all good. I think the same thing with business. I don't think there are any errors on the business. I think they only released 2 business videos in that time.
That does help.
Yeah, it does
That's a
really
good
help.
hack. We should make fewer videos.
Oh, here we go. The internet's being a bit slow. No, they're both fine. EU again, I think it's the same as last week, by the way, has ended up being quite controversial. I think for similar reasons as last time.
Yeah.
So let's do global now because it's actually slightly less controversial. There've been a ton of videos that have come out since we did our last.
Especially on global. Global's firing on all cylinders right now.
Really, really. But I mean, yeah, it's working pretty well. It doesn't seem to be much of a, you can't exhaust the audience appetite apparently. As is normally the case, in basically any video about the US election, the like-dislike ratio has been slightly lower. I think the sort of what our average for normal videos I'd say is about 97, maybe 98 if it's a good vid. Whereas for US content, it's more like 95. The ones we've done most recently, one of them was, can the Democrats win the House and Senate? The conclusion of that video actually is sort of no. The answer, well, it's not no, but the answer, and we make this very, very explicit, is that the polls are very, very close.
Yeah.
Both parties could win trifectas, hypothetically.
Sure.
And as we say in the outro, Republicans are probably slightly favored to do so because the Senate is definitely more doable for Republicans than it is for Democrats.
Yeah.
But I think there's a sense in which that sort of title and thumb is a bit disingenuous because the implication is that the Democrats are doing
more likely.
Yeah, I think the way I was thinking about that actually is that at the time it looked like polling was pretty good for the Democrats. I think that has changed in the past couple of weeks. But so I sort of was doing it off the back of Democrats on the up, especially because the House and Senate polling was looking quite good for them. So if you'd asked like a couple of months ago, could Democrats win a trifecta? The answer was just like no. They might look pretty good at the presidential level, but both the House and Senate were looking a bit weak, especially the Senate. And now, in part thanks to Dan Osborne in Nebraska, I think, who's like an independent who it's hard to put him into a sort of Democrat-Republican box, but he probably could caucus with the Democrats. It now looks at least possible that they could hold the Senate. So that's what I was doing there. It was more off the back of like, well, I saw political momentum going. And then more recently, we did why Trump has sort of overtaken Harris in the polls. That is a fair bit lower. That's 92.4, in part just because it's done very well. So it's only a couple of days old. It's on sort of like 400,000. Also because I think this invites controversy in so many directions. You know what I mean? You get loads of Democrats on one side who say stuff like, you know, the polls are lying, the Republicans are flooding the zone with Republican polls. They don't like poly market. You know, it's crypto bros. They're sort of trying to give Trump momentum.
We love poly market.
Yeah.
That's the headline of this episode.
I've been on the poly market thing for ages.
Yeah.
So,
is Zach an investor in poly market? That's this episode's title.
But yeah, they don't like that. And then conversely, you get Republicans who push back against any caveat I put in there. So, you know, in that we talk about poly market in the video and we say that, like, on the one hand, it's a betting market.
Yes.
That just means that biases should balance out because there's essentially a profit to be turned if you think that there is a bias in the market. You know, if you think that the poly market is sort of biased towards Trump, there's nothing stopping you from just getting a crypto wallet. I mean, there is a little bit stopping you. It's not that easy. But getting a crypto wallet and just, you know, piling on a bet.
It's not just Trump fans that have access to crypto.
Exactly.
Anyone could.
And we say that, but then we say, oh, on the other hand, you know, it is true that in the aggregate, crypto leans Trump. And there are other things, I don't think we go into this much here, but you can also basically like look at different bets on poly market. So like, for example, like what the odds of winning like Pennsylvania are. And you could see at a certain point at least that these things weren't moving in unison. So like the odds of Trump winning, just the headline odds of Trump winning were going up, but the odds of him winning Pennsylvania on poly market, which is a separate sort of betting market, that Pennsylvania question, weren't moving at the same rate, even though basically whoever wins Pennsylvania wins.
Basically in lockstep.
So you and that says something about the sort of like the fact that it is not a perfect market, as it were. Do you see what I mean? Like liquidity is not sufficiently high, and like the user base isn't like, well, clearly no one is, but like totally rational to the point where like all of the results are entirely sort of like probabilistically consistent with one another. But yeah, so and we put some caveats in there about like why you might not want to trust the poly market. The other one is that there are these whales, these dudes who are literally spending tens of millions of dollars or crypto on Trump, and that might sort of skew the market a little bit.
Why? Just because they probably genuinely believe he's fairly likely to win and they get their money back, but also, do they think that helps him?
I think what it could literally just, so that there's a nefarious explanation, which is that it's people trying to create momentum for him. So it's sort of like
so that we say in videos.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing
because we're going to swing the election, obviously.
Yeah, of course. The CIA paid us very good money.
You should know how many Pennsylvania viewers we have. It's overwhelming.
But yeah, that's the nefarious explanation, which some people go to. Maybe that's partly true. It's very possible. The other one is just that there are literally like a handful of dudes who really just think Trump is going to win. They happen to have loads of money in crypto, and they're going like, oh, well, why not? I'll bet loads of money.
If you've got that much crypto money.
Exactly, and the total liquidity on the thing, you know, it's the total trade on Trump is like, I think $700 million, something like that.
That's so much money.
Yeah, but you can swing. You know,
That's
given
true.
that
You don't need much.
there's 500 million on Harris. You know, if you and some people are betting 20 million. You bet 20 million, you push up a couple of percentage points. You do make a difference. And so, but there's also just a sort of innocent, that's the innocent explanation. They're just a couple of dudes who just have got loads of money who are like, fuck, I think Trump's going to win. I'm going to make a whole load off it.
What a way to impact a TLDR video too. If you've got like a few million, well, a few tens of millions knocking around, you could get a video about any party's rise in the polls.
Very exciting stuff.
Very exciting.
Yeah, or you could just pay us directly. I mean, we're a lot cheaper than that.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, so that's the US ones. And then I don't think that actually is...
the outcome of that is...
Those...
is that going to change anything? So we got that pushback from, well, I guess Republicans who are upset by those caveats and Democrats who didn't like it in the first place.
The other thing that Republicans are upset by is the fact that we say sort of overtaken Harris in the polls. I say that because he hasn't overtaken her in the national polls. He's overtaken her in the Electoral College. So that's the caveat there. And also, I say sort of because, as we say in the video, it's gone from a toss-up to a toss-up. It's just, I think there's a sort of like general...
to say overtaken would overstate it, surely.
Yeah, I think so. My main thing, I think, is also the national polling thing. Like, I feel like if I said Trump has overtaken Harris in the polls,
that implies something that isn't true.
Yeah, doesn't that to you imply that like it's a national
Also, we
poll
get
thing?
pushback for clickbaity thumbnails all the time that overstate the reality. And for once, we don't do that. And then we get pushback. It's unbelievable.
I just also love little brackets in the title.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just makes you feel a bit human.
It's a bit, it's a bit YouTube. I know what you mean.
Is
there any takeaway from that then? Or just people are going to be upset with us?
I just don't think there was anything wrong with that video. No, I don't think there is any. I don't think I can apologise for anything there. I think that is just what.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we did anything wrong there.
You're a long-time investor in Polymarket. You're not going to say anything against the brand.
Yeah, I think some of it, by the way, is that like there's this like constant, in some sense, an over-obsession with the polls, in that like, as we said, like,
Which we're not fueling at all, right?
but people get very obsessed when like someone's implied odds of winning the Electoral College like flip above 50%, and like functionally it's a toying cost either way. Maybe it's slightly changed now. I mean, depends which pollster you look at, but Trump does have a little bit of a lead. Polymarket, he's sort of 2 and 3 chances, and that is no longer coin toss. But when we did that video, it was just coin toss to coin toss, and I think that like quite a lot of people get grumpy about that sort of like slightly boring analysis when it's just like, no, Trump is now going to win. Yeah. And it's like, well, he might do, but it's just gone 50-50 to 50-50, or like 52, 48 to 48-52. So yeah, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's a sort of victim of both the fact that it's an America video or US election video, which always just does worse, and then also that it's done quite well, and that just seems to is what tipped it down. So that Trump video has like 92.4 at the moment, which is low, but I don't think we've done anything wrong, unfortunately. So there you go. No apologies yet, I know. Well, actually, I should apologise. We did make some mistakes on the UK that I didn't formally apologise for.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Just a late apology.
Get the apology counter up.
Very, very sorry. We acknowledge those.
Okay, good.
Now, EU, which I think last time we did this, has become the most controversial channel. The last time we did an editorial, October 5th. Since then, we've done about 9 videos on EU. I think about half of those, let me just count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, more than half, have lower than acceptable like-dislike ratios. Well, let's start with the one furthest away. The one furthest away is why Europe's economy could catch up with America. There's 95.5, which is pretty fine, but it's still below par. So I think there's a couple of things that provoke some irritation in this video. The first thing is that originally it was titled something, I think there was a bit more about why Europe has fallen behind America or something like that, something a bit more negative about the European economy. And we always get sort of, rightly patriotic Europeans saying that like, no, Europe is doing great. And we've done videos on the lines of why Europe is, its economy is doing better than some of the doomsayers say. I think we do make those caveats in the video, and as we said, the video is about can Europe catch up with America, and I think there are certain respects in which it's hard to deny that Europe is behind America. The other thing people had to go about, and I actually do want to quite actively apologise for this, because I think this was a massive oversight on my part. And the Draghi report, one of the sort of like apparent symptoms of Europe's economic malaise that it identifies is the fact that Europe doesn't have any big companies anymore. And we haven't created new big companies, and we specialise in weird stuff like, luxury goods and
Novo Nordisk.
Cars. Yeah, exactly. And Novo Nordisk is like our one quite cool one. But
we made a business video about it. Maybe Draghi watched it.
Hopefully. But then I think it's inevitable, probably.
It's hard to imagine he would have come to that conclusion on his own.
He had a lot of free time on his hands. He was doing a report for a year as well.
I know, it's one of those things, you write it in the last few days. The deadline's coming up, and before that
he
you
did
just
actually delay it quite a few times.
Exactly.
Can you imagine Mario Draghi getting the call from the day, like, yeah, I'm ready in like a couple of days. Yeah, 100%. But yeah, so and one of the things he said, and I think that actually, a lot of people pushed back on that, and that the basic idea that we should want big companies as like an intrinsic economic good, maybe that's not 100% true. And like, I actually sort of think I agree with that. And I think that we should have caveated that more aggressively in the video. There are reasons you might want big companies, which we do mention. Big companies, annoyingly, it turns out, you might hope that innovation is best achieved by lots of small companies competing with each other, but actually there's quite a lot of good historical and economic evidence to suggest that big companies, because they just have bigger profit margins, just invest more in R&D, and so they do tend to make more innovative breakthroughs. They pay a lot of taxes as well, so that's nice. They normally have very high productivity as well, which drags up your sort of aggregate productivity. But whether or not basically big companies are an end in themselves, like do we want to, is that what we really focus our policy on? Surely we want just like better growth, however that's manifest. That small companies or big companies, who cares? And this weird like slightly sort of American import, this fetishism of like mega corporations. It's just like the Europeans don't like mega corporations.
Yeah.
And I actually really get that. And I think that we probably should have made more of that in the video. The video was already quite squeezed for time because there's quite a lot of stuff going on in that video. There's quite a lot of data. But I do think in retrospect, I would have included something more on that, or talked maybe a bit more about like, you know, there are people who think we should have big companies, but at the same time, you might think that actually big companies have politically toxic impacts, because they do in lots of ways. You know, big companies become very effective lobbyists for starters. But also there's like a sort of very sort of obvious economic argument for not having big companies. It's a sort of anti-monopoly argument. And the fact that, you know, Draghi is saying we need big companies at the same time that antitrust regulators in both the US and Europe are going, we need to break up Google or whatever. There's an inconsistency there, and like, how do you square that circle? You know, we apparently both want these massive productivity improving, tax revenue giving mega companies, but at the same time, we don't want these monopolies. You know, what do we want here? And I think that talking about that tension and like, would have been a good thing to do. I'm almost now talking about it, now tempted to do like a whole video on it. Like, you know, it doesn't even matter that Europe doesn't have any big companies.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are two things there. And I would like to acknowledge on that point because I do think that was an oversight. And I think it's a sort of weird oversight from me. I'm annoyed that I oversaw it. But yeah, so that one, I think there's something amiss there. The next two are quite similar. Serbia's economic boom and basically the quiet Dutch economic boom. They're basically about those two economies performing surprisingly well. They both have slightly lower ones. Serbia is 92, which is very low. Dutch economy is 96, which is a bit below par, but still worth talking about. Both those videos is just, and whenever we do those, the economy is doing surprisingly well, we just get people from that country being like, no, it isn't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be too rude about it, but it is.
You're wrong.
You're wrong. You know, the plural of anecdote isn't data. And yeah, also on the Serbia one specifically, you've got a lot of people pushing back and saying, no, inflation is really high. We talk about that in the video. And the point there is that wage growth is higher than inflation.
Yeah.
So you have real wages, or real wage growth. And the Dutch economy stuff as well, a lot of Dutch people saying there's a housing crisis. Maybe we should talk about those things in the video. I half take that point, but I think it's quite a dense video in the first place. And I think that the basic premise is just true. Like, the Dutch economy, the graph we showed at the very, very beginning, right, which is about basically economic performance post-pandemic and all these economies, you know, if you sort of normalize it at the final quarter of 2019, Q4 2019, and you can see that everyone spikes, goes down during the pandemic, and then it's about who can get out of that trough fastest. And the Dutch economy has just done that way better than like any big, rich economy, basically, apart from obviously the US. And Italy's done surprisingly well, by the way, but that has almost been entirely driven by massive government spending, because Italy ran like I think 8% of GDP deficit thanks to that super bonus in like 2022 or 2023 or something like that. Whereas the Dutch have basically, you know, ran consecutive deficits in 2020, 2021, and a bit in 2022, I think, but not even very big ones. You know, they were sort of all below 10%, I think, of GDP. And then immediately got back into surplus, which is just incredible. Like, well, I don't want to sound too sort of like austere, do you know what I mean? It's just incredible, you know, the way they cut public spending is just wow. I sound like the Troika personified, but that's a niche joke for you guys. But they did do, and at the same time, again, as like countries like Italy were sort of driving that economic growth, massive government spending, and countries like France and frankly actually places like Germany as well, the UK, all struggling to get their basically public spending under control, or to bring it back into sort of balance. So I think that is quite something. You know, I think that it's very easy to be, I mean, who isn't grumpy about inflation? Inflation is just not fun. But the Dutch are doing better than most people. There was a slight error on that video, by the way, as well. It's that we didn't talk about the fact that the inflation data that we show on screen, this isn't in a corrected comment on the video, so if you want to know more, go read that. But basically, the Dutch inflation data looks particularly like there's a particularly sharp increase and a particularly sharp drop compared to other European countries. That's in part because of how the Dutch Statistical Institute measures inflation. It basically sort of like, not overweights, but in relative terms, overweights changes in food and energy, which obviously is like the biggest component of inflation, and especially energy. It basically like doesn't account for the fact that in most, it's complicated, but basically like normally you'd measure, it's too complicated. It's about basically month-on-month contracts versus like annual contracts, and
it's in the comment.
Which one? Yeah, exactly. There's actually a whole like note by Rabobank that you can go read if you want to get into it. But yeah, so that was like error. But yeah, those two videos in principle about that error, obviously I apologize for. But in principle, I don't think there's anything wrong with those. And it is of course not inconsistent that an economy could be doing surprisingly well, at least in relative terms, and yet also inflation be high there.
There you go.
Yeah, we don't say that that isn't the case. Then why hard right parties on the rise in Norway? It's the usual opposition, 95.7, so pretty good. But it's the usual opposition to use the term hard or far right. I think we talked about this in another video, they did, of course we did, in the dedicated editorial. We said we would couch those more actively in sort of conversation by sort of talking about their policies as well, whenever we talk about the label far right or hard right. In that video we do to a fair extent, maybe not as much as we probably should have done. So I'll give a little sort of semi-apology for that one, half acknowledge. We could have done more to just sort of flesh out like these are their policies in this context, they're far right or hard right. And then finally, Netherlands and Hungary ditched the EU's migration pact. What next? That's currently on 95. It's a video came out today. The opposition here seems to be, and again I think we talked about this last week, about the use of the term irregular as opposed to illegal immigration. Again, for the reasons mentioned last week, so I think some people prefer irregular over illegal because they think the word illegal dehumanizes migrants or something along those lines. I take that point, but the main reason that we're using it is not that. It's because it's just less accurate. Like, it's just ambiguous as to whether or not, basically, people turning up on European borders is illegal. It probably isn't. You know, Ukraine is a good example, right? So, like, you know, let's say you flee Ukraine, you leave your papers at home, you don't have time to get it or whatever, and you just turn up on the Polish border. Is that illegal? Yeah. I mean, you are almost definitely a legitimate asylum seeker. There was no regular route available to you. It's probably not illegal. It's irregular. You're not coming via one of the regular migration pathways. But it's not illegal. There are probably cases, I mean, of course there are cases which just like is blatantly illegal. So if you're not a genuine asylum seeker, however we want to define that term, or a genuine refugee rather, and you turn up on the, you know, I don't know, you know, if you're a Russian spy, and you turn up to, it's nice.
It's a good example.
Thank you. Yeah,
nice,
exactly.
No debate there.
Yeah. And you turn up on the Polish border, and they go, wait a second, well, you're a Russian spy, aren't you? Then you go like, you got me. You know? Yes, I am an illegal immigrant. That is illegal. But the sort of the case of the Ukrainian refugee, it's a genuine refugee. It's in some sense, it depends again on that's why the term irregular is so much more preferable to illegal, because when it's quote unquote illegal depends quite specifically on the national law, because it would be sort of, I presume, like an administrative infraction. You know, the Polish authorities would prefer that you file an official migration or asylum request or whatever at some point, but it's not illegal. And the point there is that maybe, I mean, to my mind, I think a lot of people disagree on this because, again, actually interpreting migration and international laws is genuinely difficult, and what constitutes illegal. And but to my mind, illegal migration is probably best understood as a subset of irregular migration, right? There are some irregular migrants who are just coming here illegally. But there are lots of irregular migrants who, at least according to international law, are coming here entirely legally. They're genuine refugees. They just don't have a regular pathway available to them. So yeah, that's my that I think is what I would say about that. But yeah. Okay. So I think that's everything on that. Yeah, that's basically everything.
There you go.
Yeah. Good. That felt pretty quick, no?
Did it?
He's about efficient.
Okay.
I know he's efficient. Sometimes there's a fair bit of warbling.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Nice.
That was the editorial. We'll be back in 2 weeks-ish.
Yeah.
Also, we have a special episode, not of the editorial, but of our semi-annual series where we respond specifically to your criticisms. We had 1,000 people submit criticisms. We've filtered through them and we're firing them at all of the TLDR team members, basically.
My ego just doesn't need this after the dislike of the last editorial.
So join us. We said we weren't mentioning that.
Yeah, but who's watching now?
So join us probably on one of the main channels to watch that at some point.
Nice. All right. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.